While they look like simple glass tubes, they'll soon radiate enough light to tell the time in total darkness. They call it the watch that won the war. June 6, 1944, D-Day. The Allied assault on German-held Normandy was the biggest coordinated land, air, and sea invasion of all time. Over 150,000 troops had to move in perfect sync. And to succeed, every division on land, sea, and air had to synchronize their watches to 6:30 a.m. sharp. In Vietnam, night maneuvers became standard military strategy. Soldiers needed to tell time in pitch black, creating the need for the luminescent watch face. Today, the Traser H3 watch has all the technology to keep up with the times. The Traser watch breaks down into the face, the Traser ring, and the capillaries. The capillaries are the watch's light source, and they begin as a 1 centimeter glass tube. They're heated and stretched until they're 0.5 millimeters in diameter. These tubes, or capillaries, are cut to 60 centimeter lengths. This military watch doesn't just glow in the dark. The tritium hands and indicators are charged by a chemical reaction that will glow day and night, 24/7, for at least 10 years. And it starts with tiny glass tubes. Next, colored phosphorus powder is poured into the tubes and then checked under black light for even distribution. Different mixes of powder generate different colors. Green is the most popular because the human eye perceives it as brightest. The capillaries now shine under black light, but in order to make them glow in the true darkness, the powder is mixed with a minute amount of radioactive gas called tritium. It's worth $30,000 a gram. First, the tubes are attached to a device that will distribute the tritium. The glass tubes are flash frozen in order to better trap the gas. Then, tritium gas is pumped into the frozen capillaries and then heated to mix evenly with the phosphorus powder. A chemical reaction between the tritium and the phosphorus is what gives the tubes their luminescence. Then, the ends are pinched and sealed shut. The radioactive tritium is now encapsulated in the glass, making it completely risk-free for the wearer. Next, the tubes are laser cut into small pieces that will fit easily onto the watch face. The tiny light-filled capsules are checked under a microscope for size, shape, and glow factor. A robotic arm then lines up the pieces perfectly onto pallets in preparation for assembly onto the watch face. Assembling the watch face starts by adding capillaries to what is called a traser ring, a ring which displays every hour. A robotic arm drops a glowing capillary into the hour indicators. Next, a capillary is added to each of the watch's hands. Then, the watch face and the traser ring are pressed together. The watch hands are then carefully attached, and the outer case is mounted on top of the face and traser ring. Finally, the back plate is pressed on and squeezed shut. The completed watch is then labeled with laser engraving. The Traser H3 isn't just a pretty face. It's got to be deadly accurate under the most rigorous conditions. So the watch is dipped in a solution of salt water that's the same concentration as human sweat. It gets punched in the face, dropped on the ground, blasted with extreme temperatures, and shaken up to make sure nothing comes loose. If it's rugged enough to survive the test, A band is strapped on, the watch is tagged, and the Traser is good to go. On the battlefield where every second counts, keeping time means staying alive. Coming up on Battle Factory, a first response tool that cuts out a path to safety. And a complete overhaul puts this battle tank back in the battle. Each one of these handcrafted precision-cut pieces will come together to create a first response tool capable of chewing through metal like a can opener. At the scene of an accident, a natural disaster, or in the combat zone, the jaws of life can cut through just about anything to gain access to a victim and pluck them from the jaws of death. Prior to the 1970s, rescue efforts were performed using crowbars, winches, and circular saws, which had the potential to send sparks flying into gas-filled wrecks. In addition, they all needed power from an external source. Today, the Jaws of Life spreaders and cutters are handheld and battery-operated and weigh under 23 kilos. The Jaws of Life cutter breaks down into the cutter, the pump body, and the cylinder. The cylinder starts as a length of solid aluminum, which is cut down to 45 centimeters. Then, the ends are ground to smooth out any sharp edges. The cylinder is placed inside an automated lathe. First, the end is turned and threaded. Then, the center is bored out. Next, the cylinder is secured in a computer-controlled cutting machine. While the metal is showered with jets of anti-friction liquid, sections for the center are milled out, and the area where the cutter will attach is carved. The same process is repeated to produce the piston, which moves the heavy cutting blades or jaw. The pistons move in and out of the cylinder under hydraulic pressure to open and close the jaws. The piston is fitted with O-rings, then lubricated so it can slide into the cylinder without damaging the interior. On September 12, 2001, one day after the tragic attacks on the Trade Center in New York, two Marines sifted through the rubble at Ground Zero, and they heard cries for help. Using the Jaws of Life, rescuers were able to cut through concrete and metal girders and reach two Port Authority cops who were buried 30 feet under the concourse and pull them out alive. Next come the cutter blades, which act more like a nutcracker than a pair of scissors. In fact, the blades only make a small initial cut into the metal. Then the sheer force of the jaws actually fracture it like a stone. And they have a force that can crack through almost 4 centimeters of solid steel. Special heat-treated metal is used to ensure that the blades are tough enough to chew through concrete, steel, and brick. Next, a steel pivot pin secures the blades together, and a lock nut fastens them tight. Finally, flexible rubber guards called blade boots keep the sharp end of the tool away from the operator's hands so it can be used safely. The Jaws of Life are powered by a hydraulic pump, which is housed in the pump body. The pump body is fitted with an electric motor and a bladder filled with a liter of hydraulic oil. The incredible force of the cutters is achieved by pumping fluid under very high pressure into the cylinder. The fluid forces the piston up and opens the arms of the cutter. The operator can then toggle the switch the other way and cause the piston to retract, which closes the arms. The engine runs on a battery, which is powerful enough to make 40 cuts without replacement. The pump engine is screwed onto the end of the cylinder, which is then covered in a protective plastic case. Before they can be put into the field, the Jaws of Life undergo a series of tests. The first test measures the Jaws' power by biting down hard on a pressure-sensitive gauge. If the Jaws don't bite down hard enough, it doesn't leave the plant. Next, the hydraulic pump is tested for leaks. Once it's field ready, final touches are added and it's packed up and shipped out. The Jaws of Life's next assignment could be a car crash or rock slide, a smoke-filled Humvee, or a building toppled by enemy mortar fire. And it may have to cut through twisted metal or concrete walls. But the goal is always the same: get rescuers in and victims out alive. Coming up on Battle Factory, an overhaul puts this tank back in fighting shape. This tank is in for an overhaul, and it's going to take 1,600 man-hours, several months, and $1 million to get this battle tank back into fighting form. And it's worth every penny. On February 24th, 1991, at the height of the Gulf War, U.S. tanks and armored vehicles raced east from Saudi Arabia into Iraq in a daring flank maneuver, later nicknamed the Hail Mary. The armored vehicle that would lead the attack was the coalition force's heavy hitter, the M1 Abrams tank. The M1 Abrams tank is the U.S. military's top gun. Since it rolled onto the battlefields in 1991, it's been the toughest, fastest, and smartest fighting machine on the ground. After 5 to 10 years of service, these $8 million tanks get battle-weary, and it's cheaper to refurbish them than to purchase new ones. And kitted with current technology and innovative add-ons, these rebuilt M1s will be better than new. The M1 Abrams breaks down into the turret, the engine, and the hull. Weighing in at 62 tons, each tank is shipped in by rail and lifted off the track by a 40-meter-high crane. It's towed into the factory, and deconstruction can begin. First, the turret is uncorked from the hull and hoisted onto a transport dolly. It will take 4 months alone to dismantle the tank down to its 12,000 parts. Some parts will be tossed, some will be refurbished, and some will be replaced with better quality components. The complete overhaul will take 10 months. Next, the 2,300-kilogram tank tracks are removed, rolled, and carried off on a forklift. The wheels and suspension are stripped off, leaving the empty 37-ton hull. The hull is armored with a composite of ceramic and spent plutonium that can withstand the enemy's best shot in a tank battle. The Abrams can dish it out, and it can take it. The hull is lifted onto a large dolly, which transports it to a massive bay called a spinner hangar. Then the crane moves the hull into a vertical position. Next, it's placed safely behind 10-meter-high, 7-ton doors. Inside, millions of tiny steel pellets are blasted at the rotating tank hull, stripping away old paint and corrosion. In 90 minutes, the hull surface has been scraped back to its original metal. Next, certain spots on the hull are cut so the tank can be retrofitted with upgraded computer and weapon systems. Next, it's primed and painted with a durable military-grade paint, giving the tank another layer against the elements. M1 Abrams' unique engine and transmission are called the Power Pack. It combines a 1,500 horsepower turbojet engine with a 6-speed hydrokinetic transmission. The tank can accelerate from 0 to 30 kilometers per hour in 7 seconds and travel at speeds of up to 70 kilometers per hour. The Abrams engine is versatile and will run on just about anything that will burn, including gasoline, jet fuel, and even perfume. The engine and transmission take 4 weeks to overhaul. When they return from battle, they're coated with dirt and riddled with rust. Sand is the nemesis of the Power Pack, and in current theaters of operation, sand is everywhere. In February 1991, in the thick of Desert Storm, a squadron of American M1 Abrams battle tanks rolled towards Iraq. The mission? Cut off the Iraqi threat to Kuwait and take down the Republican Guard divisions near the Iraq-Kuwait border. The Americans were hoping for a surprise attack, but they were spotted. A squadron of hundreds of Iraqi tanks manned by the elite Republican Guards geared up for what was to be a classic standoff. Coming up on Battle Factory, the M1 Abrams turns a blinding storm into a Hail Mary maneuver. In the early hours of February 26, 1991, American forces were headed for a face-off against the tank units of the Iraq Elite Republican Guard. The outcome of the skirmish would play a deciding role in the success of the Iraq War. The Americans' offensive line was led by 36 M1 Abrams. They had hoped to have the advantage of surprise, but a slow advance gave away their position. Then, a sandstorm swept through the desert, cutting off their air support and reducing visibility to 0. They were on their own, outgunned, and heading into battle. After 8 months of the rebuild, the M1 Abrams is ready to be put back together. Its hull has been stripped, it's been repainted, outfitted with armor, and the engines have been rebuilt. All of the tank's parts have been either retooled or replaced. It's time to reassemble the 68-ton giant. Then, the tracks are laid out. A drag line pulls the tracks over, and they're wound onto the sprockets and road wheels. Then, connectors are hammered in to hold the tracks in place. The turret fits back onto the hull like a 21-ton cap into the refurbished ring. It's a tough, delicate operation, lowering the heavyweight turret and a 6-meter cannon until it's perfectly aligned. In a blinding sandstorm, U.S. forces found themselves up against an unseen enemy. But the M1 Abrams could turn this desert storm to their advantage. Equipped with revolutionary GPS systems, they were able to navigate through 0 visibility and pull a Hail Mary flank move to sweep around the Iraqis, who they'd ID'd with thermal imaging. And when the sand cleared, the Americans were right on top of the Republican Guard. They didn't stand a chance. Before returning to the battlefield, the M1 Abrams has to survive the proving ground. A series of rigorous tests designed to push the tank to its limits and assess every aspect of the rebuild. Failure here could mean casualties in the combat zone. The tank tears through its paces, testing speed, target lock, and turret rotation, mobility, and sharp angle climbs. The M1 Abrams is battle ready. After 10 months, the refurbished tank is better than before, maybe even better than when it came off the line the first time around. The U.S. Army plans to keep on refurbishing this model until 2040. By then, there will be M1 Abrams that have served 50 years of active duty, that are veterans of the last great tank battle of the 20th century.